I worked myself to the bone to fund my husband's studies, nearly ruining my eyes in the process. Yet on the day he topped the imperial examinations and became the #1 scholar, he saw me as a stain on his reputation and threw me into the river. Little did he know, I was actually the legitimate daughter of the Marquis of Dingbei. The princess he was so eager to curry favor with was my dearest friend. Now that I was back at the Marquis's mansion, I was going to watch him crash and burn in his quest to become the imperial son-in-law. I appeared at the gate of the Marquis of Dingbei's mansion, dressed in tattered rags. The gatekeeper took me for a beggar and tried to drive me away. "Beat it, you beggar, scram." Just then, the Marquis returned home. When he saw me, he froze, his face twisting in shock. Tears streamed down his cheeks as he cupped my face in his hands. "Lingxian, it's really you. Father thought he'd never see you again. I've failed your mother's dying wish." It was only natural that he'd assumed I was dead after my mysterious disappearance a year ago. My concubine-born younger sister Lingxian, who stood nearby, looked at me with a strange expression. "Father, how could our sister be in such a sorry state? This woman is suspicious, she must be an imposter." She ordered the servants to chase me away with sticks. At her words, I let 2 tears fall. "Sister, have you forgotten, when we were children? The servant accidentally knocked over a charcoal basin, and I shielded you from the flames. I still have a huge scar on my arm from it. Isn't that proof enough?" With that, I rolled up my sleeve, revealing the old, ugly burn mark on my arm. Only my closest family members knew about this scar. The Marquis pulled me into a tight embrace, patting my back as he wept uncontrollably. "It's my Ronga. It really is you. Welcome home, my child. Welcome home." I couldn't hold back my tears either. But when I saw the hatred burning in Lingxian's eyes, I deliberately wiped my tears and asked, "Are you unhappy to see me come back, sister?" At my question, the Marquis turned to look at her. Lingxian quickly plastered on her usual ingratiating smile. "Of course not, father. I always said sister just ran away from home because she didn't want to get married. I knew she'd be safe." The Marquis had no time for her. He hurried me inside, ordering Mistress Yu to take good care of me. Mistress Yu's eyes were filled with concern as she fussed over me, saying how thin I'd gotten and asking about my ordeal over the past year. "Our poor Ronga, you've suffered so much out there." Mistress Yu had been my mother's personal maid before she married the Marquis as his second wife. After my mother passed away, she'd looked after me with genuine affection. Seeing her mother dote on me so, Lingxian's gaze turned even colder. She'd always been obsessed with her lowly birth. And it didn't help that her mother had no interest in fighting for the Marquis's favor. After I bathed and changed into new clothes, the mirror reflected the lively, spirited face of the Lingxian I used to be. Mistress Yu personally cooked a feast for me, filling the table with all my favorite dishes. Everyone at the table greeted me with warm, sincere smiles, everyone except Lingxian. After dinner, I asked my old personal maid about what had happened at the mansion while I was gone. She replied respectfully that when the palace heard about my disappearance, the emperor, sympathizing with the Marquis for losing his daughter, had cancelled the marriage alliance between our family and the crown prince. Lingxian had thrown a huge tantrum when she heard the news. At that moment, I could guess her scheme. She'd wanted to replace me as the Marquis's only daughter and marry into the Eastern Palace to become crown princess. Unfortunately for her, her plan had fallen through, which explained why she was so furious at my return. The maid went on to say that Princess Jinnen's wedding was approaching, and her fiancé was none other than the newly crowned #1 scholar, Pei Xian. So he'd latched onto the princess. The celebrated #1 scholar Pei Xian was none other than my husband. A year ago, I'd been rescued by Pei Xian's mother by the river. I'd lost my memory and couldn't remember anything. Taking pity on me as a homeless orphan, they'd taken me in. I'd grown close to Pei Xian over time and eventually gave myself to him. To repay their kindness, I'd slaved away day and night to support his studies. In winter, I'd soaked my hands in freezing cold water to wash clothes for money, all while caring for his ailing mother. All the chores his mother used to do had fallen on my shoulders, and I'd endured constant scoldings if I worked too slowly. Sometimes, when Pei Xian came home drunk at night, he'd even beat and kick me. Gradually, I'd realized the truth. He'd married me only because no other woman would have him. Every time he'd hugged me, he'd whispered sweet nothings in my ear. Urxi, wait until I top the imperial examinations. I'll give you the grandest wedding in the world, and you'll never have to work so hard again. From now on, I'll take care of you. Urxi was the name he'd given me. With no memories of my past and nowhere else to go, I'd foolishly believed him. I'd waited anxiously for his return for months while he traveled to the capital to take the exams. To my surprise, he really had become #1 scholar, but that day had marked my death sentence. He'd come home elated, saying he wanted to take me boating to celebrate, but once we reached the middle of the river, his expression had turned cold. You're nothing but a lowly orphan. How dare you dream of being my wife? He'd then grabbed me and thrown me into the river. Pei Lang, please save me, I'd screamed, but he'd let out a cold laugh and rode away without a second glance. He'd tried to kill me. I'd struggled desperately in the water, vowing that if I survived, I'd make him pay 1,000-fold for his betrayal. As water filled my nose and mouth, drowning me, everything had come flooding back to me. I was no lowly orphan. Not even the crown prince himself was unworthy of me, let alone a mere #1 scholar. A year ago, Father had told me that the emperor had ordered the marquis's daughter to serve in the Eastern Palace. As the legitimate daughter of the Shen family, I'd been reluctant, but I knew I couldn't defy the imperial edict. Shen Lingshan had wanted to take my place and become crown princess, but Father had refused because of her concubine-born status. She'd thought that if I were gone, she could fulfill her dream of becoming crown princess. For over a decade, she'd pretended to be my loving sister, all while secretly resenting me for my noble birth. She'd known I loved horseback riding and archery, so she'd told me that since we might never see each other again after I entered the palace, she'd wanted to go hunting with me one last time. By some coincidence, the horse I usually rode had fallen ill that day, and she'd picked another one for me. That horse had suddenly bolted in the woods, carrying me off a cliff and into the rushing river below. I refused to believe her hands were clean in this. They'd all assumed I couldn't swim and would surely drown. But fate had smiled on me, allowing me to escape death time and time again and return to them unscathed. Those who tried to harm me should have prayed I'd never come back. Because now, I was going to make them pay for their crimes 1,000 times over. Pei Xian was living the dream of marrying the princess, completely unaware that the woman he tried to kill was the legitimate daughter of the Marquis of Dingbei and the childhood best friend of Princess Jinan, closer to her than blood sisters. I couldn't stand by and watch Jinan marry such a hypocrite. I immediately ordered a carriage and rushed to the princess's mansion. When she saw the chilblains on my hands, left from washing clothes in icy water for Pei Xian during the winter, she burst into tears of sympathy. Lingxian, who did this to you? I told her everything that had happened to me over the past year, and she cried inconsolably. I never liked Pei Xian in the first place. I only agreed to marry him because Father forced me to. He's such a weak, spineless scholar, always hanging around me like a leech. I rested my head on her lap. Just like we used to do when we were children. Jinan, I refuse to let Pei Xian get away with this. Will you help me expose his true colors? She pinched my cheek playfully. Of course I will. When have I ever said no to you? He dared to treat you like this. He deserves to die a horrible death for me to get even. I chatted with Jinan for a while longer, staying until dusk before leaving. As the carriage trundled along, a thought nagged at me. With Pei Xian's meager talent, not even up to my level, how had he managed to become #1 scholar? Suddenly, the coachman yelled "Whoa," and the carriage jolted to a sudden stop. Miss, there's a beggar blocking the road. The coachman raised his whip to lash the beggar, but I lifted the carriage curtain and shouted for him to stop. I climbed down from the carriage and saw the beggar lying unconscious in the road, covered in wounds, presumably from starvation. I told the coachman to help him up, as the man was lifted. His head lolled to the side, revealing his face. Despite the dirt and grime, I recognized him at once. My heart skipped a beat. I quickly told the coachman to carry him onto the carriage and warned him not to breathe a word of what had happened today to anyone. I'd seen this man several times before at Pei Xian's house. He was Pei Xian's closest friend. When Yenyu, his family had been quite well off, and he'd always been generous in helping Pei Xian. What's more, he was far more talented than Pei Xian by leaps and bounds, so why was he reduced to such a pitiful state? I brought him back to the marquis's mansion. Fortunately, I'd studied some medicine in my childhood, so I was able to treat his injuries. His attacker had been ruthless. Once a handsome, refined young man, his body was now covered in bruises and cuts, and all his fingernails had been torn out. His throat was in particularly bad shape. If I'd been any later in treating him, he would have lost his ability to speak forever. Luckily, the marquis's mansion was never short of rare and precious medicinal herbs. I fed him some food, and he soon regained consciousness. When he opened his eyes and saw me, he looked as if he'd seen a ghost, scrambling backward while covering his face in terror. When Yenyu, you're safe now, I saved you. I told him what Pei Xian had done to me. With my reassurance, he gradually calmed down. It took him immense effort to speak a single complete sentence. Through the excruciating pain, he told me his story. He'd discovered that Pei Xian had swapped their exam papers. When he'd gone to confront Pei Xian about it, Pei Xian had knocked him out, locked him up, and tortured him mercilessly. Fearing that when Yenyu would expose his fraud, Pei Xian had poisoned him, hoping to silence him forever. He'd managed to escape only when Pei Xian, busy celebrating his success with his newfound friends after becoming #1 scholar, had let his guard down. He'd been so terrified when he saw me earlier because he'd thought I was still Pei Xian's loving wife. Pei Xian, how could he possibly have that much power? I asked, confused. Pei Xian had no official position or influence. Every cent he had was earned by my hard work. He had never been acquainted with any powerful figures in the past, so where had he gotten the clout to switch exam papers? Moreover, he had always been a cowardly man. How dare he commit such a heinous act as murder to cover his tracks? He racked his brains to recall the events of those days, trembling with rage. His once gentle eyes blazed with hatred. I heard a woman's voice, before he could finish his sentence. My servant rushed in to report that Shen Lingshan was hurrying toward my courtyard. I told Wen Yenyu to hide behind the curtain at once. He had barely concealed himself when Shen Lingshan slammed the door open and scanned the room suspiciously. "What brings you in such a rush, sister?" I asked coolly. She wore her usual fake smile. "Sister, I heard you brought a man back to the mansion. Do I need to report every person I bring home to you? Mother is in charge of the household now." I'm merely helping her share the burden, lest someone who just returned forgets the rules, trysts with men outside the family, and tarnishes the marquis's reputation. So it's Mistress Yu who's managing the household. I was under the impression that during the year I was gone, a concubine-born daughter who can't even balance the household accounts had seized power, climbing over her legitimate elder sister to lord it over everyone. Mistress Yu had served by my mother's side since childhood, and my mother had treated her extremely well. Their bond was deep. After my mother passed away, she had extended that affection to me, caring for me out of genuine love. Furthermore, as my mother's daughter, without my mother, she would never have had the chance to enter the marquis's mansion as his second wife. For this reason, Mistress Yu had always shown me great respect. Shen Lingshan, however, was a fool with an inflated sense of self-importance. She coveted everything I had, constantly competing with me since childhood. yet always falling short in every way. Furious, she immediately ordered her maid to search my room, but the maid stood rooted to the spot, daring not to move. There is a clear distinction between legitimate and concubine-born, between superior and inferior. It is not your place to overstep your bounds, sister, I said with a faint smile. Do you think if I asked Mistress Yu to let me take back control of the household, she would hand over the family seal and keys to me? She deluded herself into thinking that her constant whispering in father's ear had secured Mistress Yu's position as the head of the household. In truth, I had simply grown tired of managing the estate and, seeing how eagerly she curried favor, had indulged her wish to get some peace and quiet for myself. But she knew full well that if I asked Mistress Yu, the keys would be returned to me without hesitation. She clamped her mouth shut. Seething with anger, she shot me a venomous glare and stormed off unwillingly. As soon as Shenlingshan left, I hurried to help Wen Yenyu out from behind the curtain and sit down. His face was ashen, beads of sweat dotted his forehead, and on closer inspection, he was trembling slightly. Was that your sister? He asked weakly. I nodded and urged him to tell me the full story. When Pei Xian blindfolded me and locked me up, there was a woman's voice beside him. That voice was hers, I would never mistake it. My heart skipped a beat. I had never imagined that the person helping Pei Xian was Shenlingshan. Of course, with her assistance, everything Pei Xian had done would have been infinitely easier. After all, with her legitimate elder sister missing, even though she was unworthy, she had wielded power comparable to mine. What I had not expected was that the two of them had colluded so early on. They truly were a match made in hell. Wen Yenyu took a deep breath and continued, after Pei Xian and I came to the capital together, he never bothered to study diligently. Instead, he borrowed a great deal of money from me to curry favor with high-ranking officials and nobles, hoping to latch onto a powerful patron. I used to advise him earnestly to turn back from the path of corruption, but I never imagined this would be how he repaid my kindness. Scholars cherished their hands above all else, for their livelihood depended on them. I had also heard that he wrote a beautiful hand. He looked down at his battered, mutilated hands and sighed deeply. I wonder if I will ever be able to hold a brush and write again. You have my word, I will arrange for the best physicians in the land to treat you. Moreover, a devious plan began to form in my mind. I will make them pay 100-fold for the pain and suffering they have inflicted upon us both. When Yenyu's eyes lit up with hope, to announce to the world that the most esteemed legitimate daughter of the Marquis of Dingbei had returned home, father hosted a grand banquet in my honor. I instructed Jinan to make sure she brought Pei Xian with her. The stage was set, how could the main performers be absent? Veiled and dressed in a magnificent velvet robe woven with peacock feathers, adorned with jewels from head to toe, I made my entrance. There was no way Pei Xian could associate this exquisitely dressed noble lady with the ragged, hard-working wife who had once waited on him hand and foot. When I spotted Pei Xian sitting beside Jinan, a satisfied smile spread across my lips. Distinguished guests, I announced in a loud, clear voice for all to hear, I, Lingxian, owe my survival and safe return to the Marquis's mansion entirely to the kindness of one person who saved my life. Father stroked his beard and said with a smile, Oh, is your benefactor present today? Bring him forth at once, I must thank him properly. Of course I have invited my benefactor, I replied. I called out toward the door, Please enter, honored benefactor. Dressed in the robes of a noble young master, when Yenyu strode confidently into the hall, under my care, he had regained his former handsome, spirited appearance. The moment Pei Xian and Shenlingshan laid eyes on him, their faces drained of color, and they exchanged looks of sheer terror. Jinan dragged Pei Xian over to greet me. As we exchanged pleasantries, I noticed that cold sweat was beading on his forehead. When Yenyu remained calm and composed, locking eyes with Pei Xian's terrified gaze, he smiled and bowed respectfully. Long time no see, Brother Pei. Who would have thought you were so capable, not only topping the imperial examinations to become #1 scholar, but also securing the hand of a princess as your wife? I am truly impressed." Pei Xian was so frightened that he could barely hold his wine cup steady, spilling wine all over his robes. This was exactly the state of panic I wanted to see him in. At that moment, Shen Lingxian stepped forward to smooth things over. She glanced at Wen Yanyu and asked, "Is this the man you secretly brought back to the mansion the other day, sister?" Wen Yanyu immediately stepped in front of me to shield me and retorted, "The marquis has long known that I owe the young lady a debt of gratitude for saving my life. He personally invited me to the mansion as an honored guest. While I was here, I did happen to hear that a certain second young lady, despite being a concubine-born daughter, had the audacity to search the chambers of her legitimate elder sister. Jinan, standing nearby, covered her mouth and laughed softly, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "Oh, Shen Lingxian, how old are you now? And still so lacking in basic manners. Should I send Nanny Rong from the palace to teach you some proper etiquette?" Nanny Rong was notorious for her strictness. Shen Lingxian immediately tucked her tail between her legs and scurried away. Pei Xian, however, had no means of escape and was forced to stand there in agony between us. Jinan, disgusted by the way his legs were shaking like a leaf, quickly found an excuse to dismiss him, as I had expected. The two fools were so rattled by the encounter that Shen Lingxian snuck out of the mansion that very night, disguised in a maid's clothes. Wen Yanyu and I followed her at a discreet distance, trailing her through the moonlight all the way to a forest outside the city walls. Sure enough, she had arranged to meet Pei Xian there. Shen Lingxian leaned against Pei Xian, who wrapped his arms around her in a tight embrace. He snarled angrily, "Wen Yanyu is still alive. And has even managed to ingratiate himself with the legitimate daughter of the marquis. Linger, you told me you were the only daughter of the marquis's mansion. How did an elder sister suddenly appear out of nowhere?" She was surprisingly candid, confessing everything about how she had tried to have me killed. I could never stand the way she lorded it over everyone, flaunting the fact that her mother was a princess. Why should she, as a daughter of the Shen family, be allowed to marry into the Eastern Palace and become crown princess, while I could not? Her mother died when she was young. If it weren't for my mother taking pity on her and treating her well, she would never have dared to act like a high-born lady, putting on those ridiculous airs just because she's the daughter of a princess. In a fit of rage, I devised a plan to make her horse bolt and throw her off a cliff. I never imagined she would be so lucky as to survive and return home. The moment I had first laid eyes on her after my return, I had sensed something was amiss, and now my suspicions were confirmed. She was indeed the one who had tried to kill me. I had treated her with nothing but kindness in the past, even regarding her as my own blood sister. I had never dreamed that, consumed by jealousy, she would be capable of such a heinous act of fraternal betrayal. A murderous glint flickered in Pei Xian's eyes as the moonlight cast a sinister shadow over his face. Dead men tell no tales. This time, we cannot afford to leave Wen Yanyu alive. Shen Lingxian rested her head on his chest and said with a smirk, "Why don't we drug Shen Lingxian at your future wife's birthday banquet? Then we can lure her and Wen Yanyu to the same room, hide nearby, and catch them in the act of adultery for all to see." A cruel glint flashed in her eyes as she giggled maliciously. "So what if she's the daughter of a princess, the legitimate daughter of a marquis? I will destroy her reputation and reduce her to utter ruin." When Yanyu and I exchanged a knowing glance, what better way to catch a turtle than to trap it in its own jar? They would soon reap what they had sown. On the way back to the mansion, I couldn't help but feel a wave of melancholy wash over me when I thought about how I had once wholeheartedly trusted both of these people. When Yanyu patted my shoulder gently and comforted me, "You've had a long, hard day, it's all over now." I looked up at him, memories flooding back of how kind he had been to me when we were at Pei Xian's house. Seeing how I slaved away day and night for Pei Xian while wearing tattered, threadbare clothes, he had secretly given me several bolts of fine silk cloth, urging me to make myself some new dresses. Unfortunately, Pei Xian had stolen all that cloth from me. I smiled at him and said, "I'm fine. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger, and our best days are still ahead of us." When Yenyu froze for a moment, then turned his head away, his ears turning bright red with embarrassment, I stared at him in confusion. Ever since Shenlingxian had snuck back from her secret meeting with Pei Xian in the woods, she had suddenly stopped picking fights with me. Every time she saw me, she would break into an ingratiating smile, calling me dear elder sister in the most affectionate tone imaginable. If I hadn't overheard her plotting against me with Pei Xian that night, I might have actually believed her display of sisterly love, but her scheme was clear. She wanted to lift me up high only to push me down even harder. I played along, calling her dear younger sister with equal warmth, waiting eagerly for the show to begin. On another front, I had recommended Wen Yenyu to father. To his great delight, father soon discovered that Wen Yenyu was a man of extraordinary talent. He promptly appointed him to a civil official position, allowing Wen Yenyu to come and go from the marquis's mansion openly and legitimately. This made it much easier for us to conspire together against Shenlingxian and Pei Xian. I counted down the days until Princess Jinnen's birthday banquet, eagerly anticipating the spectacle that awaited them. When the day of the banquet finally arrived, I arrived at the princess's mansion bright and early, bearing elaborate gifts. Jinnen laughed teasingly. "My dear Miss Shen, you've really gone all out this time. These gifts are fit for royalty." "Just you wait," I replied with a smirk. "The real present is yet to come." I leaned in and whispered my plan in her ear. She was so excited she nearly jumped for joy, squeezing my hand tightly and repeating "perfect" 3 times in a row. During the feast, Shenlingxian approached me, holding a wine cup with a look of meek deference and affection on her face. "I was foolish and ignorant in the past, always picking quarrels with you, elder sister. But you've always been so magnanimous, never holding my mistakes against me. Today, let us drink this cup of wine together. May all our past grievances be forgotten, and may we be a happy family from now on." "What if I refuse to drink?" I asked with a playful grin. She froze, caught off guard by my response. I took the wine cup from her hand, raised it to my lips, and pretended to drink deeply, secretly spitting the wine onto my sleeve when she wasn't looking. "Just joking," I said, wiping my mouth. How could I refuse such a gracious toast from my dear sister? If I hadn't played along, I would have wasted all the effort she and Pei Xian had put into their scheme. She couldn't hide the triumph in her eyes. "Truly, elder sister, you have the bearing of a true noble lady. I could never hope to compare to you." I feigned intoxication, pressing a hand to my forehead. "This wine has made me feel so warm all over. Sister, would you be kind enough to help me to a side room to rest for a while?" As planned, when Yenyu happened to cross paths with us as she was leading me to the room, "Elder sister, I've suddenly developed a terrible stomachache," she said, putting on a look of distress. "Perhaps Mr. Wen could accompany you to the room instead." "That would be fine," I agreed. She could barely contain her glee, hurrying away with her hand pressed to her stomach. When Yenyu had just helped me sit down on the bed when the door slammed shut behind us with a loud bang, followed by the sound of a bolt sliding into place, we exchanged a knowing glance, then began to shout and pretend to panic. The person outside the door, satisfied that their plan was working, soon walked away. The real show was about to begin, while the door was locked. The 2 fools were so confident that we had been drugged and would be too busy fooling around to escape that they had neglected to lock the window. When Yenyu gently pushed open the carved wooden window lattice, and we climbed out over the wall, Pei Xian and Shenlingxian were hiding in the adjacent side room. We crouched down by the wall, listening intently to their conversation. Shenlingxian has drunk the drugged wine. When Yenyu helped her into the side room, Pei Xian said, I also slipped some medicine into Wen Yenyu's wine. Earlier, I told the princess that I had prepared a special gift for her in that very room. Soon, she will bring everyone over to see it. Shen Lingxin's shrill laugh echoed through the thin wall, filled with malicious triumph. Thank you, Brother Xian. After today, that bitch will never be able to hold her head up again. Their voices grew heavy with labored breathing, becoming more and more urgent until they merged into one. Brother Xian. Do you think anyone will come over here? Shen Lingxin asked breathlessly. Pei Xian's voice was thick with excitement and impatience. Everyone has gone with Princess Jinan to catch them in the act. No one will disturb us here. He was normally a cautious man, and would never have dared to do something so reckless in the princess's mansion. But unbeknownst to him, Jinan had already slipped a powerful aphrodisiac into the wine she had toasted him with earlier. Since Jinan had no apparent reason to harm him, he never suspected her. It was truly a case of poetic justice. They were undone by their own devious methods. At that moment, we heard the sound of footsteps and laughter as Jinan led a large group of guests into the courtyard. She winked at me, and I pulled my veil down over my face. When Yenyu kicked the door open with a loud crash, sunlight flooded into the room, illuminating the scattered clothes on the floor and the two naked figures on the bed, who froze in terror. The noble ladies among the guests gasped and quickly turned their heads away in embarrassment. Shen Lingxin scrambled to cover herself with the bedsheets, her face ashen with shock. Jinan flew into a rage, her voice booming with fury. Pei Xian, is this the special gift you promised to give me? I stood off to the side, a faint smile playing on my lips, thoroughly enjoying the spectacle. My younger sister, you are truly bold, daring to behave so wantonly and disgracefully in the princess's mansion. Shen Lingxin's face twisted with rage. It was you set me up. I smiled even wider. But sister, you toasted me at the banquet, saying we were a happy family. Why would I harm you without reason? Shen Lingxin opened her mouth to retort, but Pei Xian, who had already scrambled into his clothes, suddenly fell to his knees with a loud thud. Jinan. It was this shameless woman who seduced me. She clung to me like a leech, refusing to let go. My heart belongs only to you. I resisted her advances with all my might. In a fit of jealousy, she drugged my food. Shen Lingxin stared at him in stunned disbelief, as if she could not believe he would betray her so ruthlessly. No, Your Highness, it's not true. It was Pei Xian who framed me. He often spoke ill of Your Highness behind your back. She scrambled out of bed, wrapping the bedsheet tightly around her trembling body, and knelt at Jinan's feet, kowtowing frantically and begging for mercy. I watched with cold detachment. I had seen his true colors long ago, the moment he had pushed me into the river to drown. He was a man utterly devoid of honor or integrity. You two accuse each other, and I cannot determine who is telling the truth, Jinan said coldly. Take them both to the punishment yard and give them 20 heavy strokes of the cane each. If they still refuse to confess their guilt, lock them in the firewood shed overnight and beat them again tomorrow. They can come back to me when they've thought better of it. When news of the scandal reached the marquis's mansion, father was so furious he could barely speak. I disown that shameless girl. Let the princess do with her as she pleases, he roared. No matter how much Mistress Yu begged him to intervene, he refused to go to the princess's mansion to bring Shen Lingxin home. Shen Lingxin had always been pampered and delicate, with skin unmarred by even a single scratch. Unlike Pei Xian, who was used to hardship, she fainted several times from the pain as the cane came down on her bare flesh, leaving her lower body covered in blood and bruises. Even after the beating, they continued to hurl accusations at each other. Frustrated, Jinan ordered them to be locked up together in the study overnight. I was looking forward to watching the two of them tear each other apart further the next day, but early the next morning, a servant from the princess's mansion arrived with shocking news. Shen Lingxin had committed suicide. This was completely unexpected. It was not part of my plan at all. I rushed to the princess's mansion with father and mistress Yu at once. In the courtyard, Pei Xian knelt on the ground, his head bowed. On the other side of the courtyard, a figure lay motionless under a white cloth. It was Shen Lingxin's body. "My poor Lingxin," Mistress Yu cried, throwing herself onto the body and sobbing uncontrollably. Father frowned deeply, letting out a long, heavy sigh. "Last night, Shen Lingxin seemed to have a change of heart," Pei Xian explained hastily. Eager to clear his name, she suddenly told me that she regretted drugging me and framing me. She said she had brought great shame to her family and was sorry for disappointing her parents and the princess. After I fell asleep, she left only a suicide note behind and hanged herself. But I knew better. A woman as vain and selfish as Shen Lingxin would never have taken her own life willingly. Pei Xian pulled the suicide note out of his sleeve and handed it to father, although the handwriting matched Shen Lingxin's. The content of the letter made it clear to me that it had not been written by her. In the letter, she confessed to being consumed by jealousy of my status as the legitimate daughter and my betrothal to the crown prince. She admitted to luring me out hunting and deliberately making my horse bolt, causing me to fall off a cliff. She also claimed that she had been secretly in love with Pei Xian for a long time, and had continued to pursue him even after he was betrothed to the princess. When I read the line that said, "Pei Lang's heart belongs solely to the princess, he has only eyes for her and refused my advances, which is why I drugged him," I smiled coldly behind my veil. He had once said almost exactly the same words to me, back when I was slaving away for him, washing clothes in freezing cold water even when I was sick with a fever. "Urxi, my heart belongs only to you, I have only eyes for you." After reading the letter, father flew into a rage. "What a disgrace to the family, a stain on our honorable name." Mistress Yu was overcome with grief and anger, collapsing onto the spot and falling seriously ill. She lay in bed, weeping constantly, blaming herself for failing to raise her daughter properly, bringing shame to the marquis's mansion, and letting down my mother and me. Little did they know that this was all Pei Xian's doing, a carefully crafted scheme to shift all the blame onto Shen Lingxin and clear his own name completely. He had no doubt prepared the suicide note long ago, waiting for the perfect moment to use her as a scapegoat. With no other evidence to contradict his version of events, Jinan had no choice but to let his story stand for the time being. He had tried to murder his own wife by pushing her into the river, brutally attacked Wen Yanyu and stolen his identity to become #1 scholar, and cheated on his fiancée the princess with another woman at her own birthday banquet. He thought he could pin all these crimes on Shen Lingxin and walk away scot-free. How naive of him. "Lingxian, I feel sick to my stomach every time I look at that despicable Pei Xian," Jinan said, grinding her teeth with rage. "He dared to kill a member of the nobility right under my nose. I wish I could tear him limb from limb. When will we be able to expose his true colors to the world?" "Soon," I replied, squeezing her hand tightly. I leaned in and whispered my new plan in her ear. "We just need to wait a little while longer." Karma was simply biding its time. This was far from over. The 6th day of the 6th lunar month was an auspicious day for weddings. As calculated by the imperial astronomer, the streets were bustling with noise and excitement. Today was the grand wedding day of Princess Jinan, the emperor's most beloved daughter. Crowds of commoners jostled to catch a glimpse of the imperial son-in-law. Pei Xian sat astride a tall steed, wearing a vibrant red wedding robe and a jade crown. Surrounded by imperial guards, a look of smug triumph adorned his face. As he rode through the cheering throngs, did he ever pause to recall the promise he had made to his first wife in his younger days, that he would give her the most magnificent wedding in the world once he passed the imperial examinations? He arrived at the palace amid the deafening roar of the crowd and knelt before the emperor. "Minister Pei," the emperor said, "Jinan has been cherished like a jewel since childhood. She is my dearest little princess. Today, I entrust her into your care." You must treat her with the utmost devotion for the rest of your days." The emperor placed the bride's hand in Pei Xian's. Pei Xian bowed deeply. "Your Majesty, I swear I will treasure the princess more than my own life." Pei Xian and the bride performed the 3 solemn bows before heaven and earth in front of all the assembled guests in the grand hall. At this moment, his lifelong dream of becoming the imperial son-in-law had finally come true. Once the bows were completed, he would be legally married to Jinan, making him the legitimate son-in-law of the emperor. But what if the woman who stood beside him and performed the bows was me all along? He lifted the bride's veil. Beneath the veil was a face he knew better than his own, one that had accompanied him through countless days and nights. He froze, his smug expression instantly replaced by sheer terror. As if he had seen a ghost, I looked at him with a bright, mocking smile. "Pei Lang, why are you so frightened to see me? Did you not promise me that you would give me the grandest wedding in the world?"
Jewels. While I lay unconscious with amnesia, he stole them all and sold them for profit. After returning to the marquis's mansion, I redeemed every last piece. I have in my possession the pawnshop receipts, bearing his signature and fingerprint. This is material evidence. As for my baseless accusations, Your Majesty need only send someone with my portrait to his old neighborhood to inquire among the neighbors. They will all confirm that I was once his wife. This is witness testimony. And as for determining who the true #1 scholar is between Pei Xian and Wen Yanyu, the truth can be revealed with the utmost simplicity. Your Majesty, simply assign them a topic here and now, and order them to compose an essay on the spot. The difference in their literary talents will be as clear as day, and the truth will speak for itself. I turned to Pei Xian, my voice cold and sharp as a blade, my eyes piercing his soul. Pei Xian, with witnesses and material evidence against you, what more do you have to say in your defense? The emperor turned to Pei Xian, his gaze heavy with scrutiny. Minister Pei, are you willing to compete against Wen Yanyu here in the hall to prove your innocence? At these words, all the strength seemed to drain from Pei Xian's body. He collapsed heavily to the floor of the grand hall, his face ashen with despair. I would have respected him a little if he had chosen to die with dignity rather than beg for mercy, but instead, he crawled over to me, threw himself at my feet, and burst into loud, sniveling sobs. Urxie, no. Miss Shin, I beg you, for the sake of our past marriage, please plead with His Majesty to spare my worthless life. You know my mother is gravely ill. She needs me to care for her. I looked down at him, my dark eyes as calm and cold as a still, deep pool. I asked him slowly, my voice ringing clearly through the silent hall. Did you ever stop to think about how I begged you for mercy on the day you pushed me into the river to drown? Without a moment's hesitation, I kicked him away from me. My bright red wedding gown blazed like fire in the palace hall. I knelt before the emperor and bowed deeply. Jinan and I have been like sisters since childhood. I only wished for her to marry a man of integrity and honor, a true man among men. I could not bear to see her wed to such a vile, despicable villain. This man not only concealed the existence of his first wife when Your Majesty bestowed the princess's hand upon him, but also carried on an illicit affair with Shen Lingshan after the betrothal. I beg Your Majesty to deliver the most severe punishment according to imperial law. Each of Pei Xian's crimes was already punishable by death in its own right. To add to that, the crime of defiling the imperial family was a sin beyond redemption. The emperor doted on Jinan more than anything in the world. Upon hearing how Pei Xian had betrayed his beloved daughter, he was consumed by a towering rage. The verdict rang out from the throne, cold and final. Pei Xian shall be subjected to death by 1,000 cuts, followed by quartering of his body. His remains shall be hung outside the city gates to rot for 7 days, exposed to the elements and devoured by birds and beasts. No one shall be permitted to collect his remains for burial. I looked down at Pei Xian, a smile playing on my lips, the very same smile he had given me on the day I drowned in the river. Husband, when your body hangs on the city wall, I will come to see you. When Yenyu's wrongful conviction was overturned, the emperor restored his title as the rightful #1 scholar and granted him the official position he so richly deserved. Lingxian, he said to me one day, his eyes filled with gratitude, if you had not saved me that day, nursed me back to health, and healed my injured throat, I would surely be dead by now. He had been so broken by Pei Xian's torture, both physical and mental, that he had lost all will to live. He had planned to lie down in the street and let a carriage run him over and end his suffering. But I had stopped my carriage, taken him in, and cured him of his wounds. His cheeks flushed slightly as he gathered his courage to speak. I have been waiting for this day, for you to avenge yourself and for me to reclaim my rightful identity, to ask you this question. Will you do me the honor of becoming my wife? I smiled gently and shook my head, declining his kind proposal. On the day of her supposed wedding, Jinan had locked eyes with the young General Hong, who had just returned to the capital after winning a great victory on the battlefield. The two of them were now deeply in love, as inseparable as honey and beeswax. The Emperor had ordered a thorough investigation into General Hong's background before finally agreeing to let him marry his beloved daughter. Father insisted that my previous marriage to Pei Xian had been a terrible mistake and that he must find me a kind, worthy husband to ensure my happiness for the rest of my life. But did a woman's happiness really have to depend on marrying the right man? I refused to attend any of the matchmaking meetings Father arranged for me. I did not marry the crown prince, nor did I become Wen Yenyu's wife. Instead, I used all the savings I had accumulated over the years to open a girls' school in the western part of the city. I believed that women, too, deserved the right to read, write, and understand the ways of the world. They did not need to rely on men to survive. When the school first opened, it was met with a storm of controversy and criticism, but the Emperor defied all opposition and publicly praised my initiative. Thanks to his endorsement, many daughters of high-ranking officials began to enroll in my school. When Yenyu surprised everyone by turning down his official position in the imperial court. Instead, he came to work as a teacher at my girls' school. Throughout the capital, people talked of the remarkable sight at the marquis's daughter's school, a former #1 scholar who had rejected a career as a high-ranking official and the chance to become an imperial son-in-law, choosing instead to be a humble teacher at a girls' school. ****, the end ****.